great white papers have 2 or 3 very strict components. One, you got to have pretty pictures in there. People are going to want to, they don't want to read hundreds of pages of minutia. 2, there has to be an ROI in there. They have to, at the end of it, whether it's the CTO buying something, a marketing person buying something, a tech person buying something, whatever the case may be, at the end of the day, there has to be a financial incentive, which I always call Geico Plus. It either saves you time, saves you money, or makes you money.
So welcome, Hossein Noshirvani. Thank you for joining me on the morebusiness.com podcast. How are you today?
Good. Thanks, Raj, for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, Hossein has got a lot of experience in building companies. He's built 3-4 of them right now and done very well. And he is scaling another company. And today we're going to talk about enterprise sales because that's the way a lot of companies scale their businesses. But that's a really tough nut to crack. It's not as simple as putting some content out there, getting an input, getting an inbound lead, following up. It's a lot more. There's a lot more to it, especially as you start selling higher dollar ticket items. So Hossein, let's talk about like the enterprise sale. I mean, there's so many different components to it. What are the first things that people should look at when they are looking at selling to large enterprises? And maybe we can even qualify that by saying, well, what is an enterprise sale? Like, what is the size of a deal?
Well, I think there's two ways of looking at it. One is sort of as a percentage of your revenue. And that brings in the fear factor. The bigger percentage of an opportunity, all of a sudden you start making, I wouldn't say irrational decisions, but you certainly make decisions that aren't purely based on the business itself. Your fear comes in. And then the other side is, how big is the company you're selling to? I think it's less about how much a particular product or widget or software or app costs and more about sort of the two buyers at the table. The seller and the buyer at the table. For us, in my experience, the first challenge we always have is sort of I think in the 1970s, the mentality was nobody ever got fired for hiring IBM. You hear that always, and you still hear it. And it's really about your first sort of jump into an enterprise sale. Again, how you define that is your revenue or their percentage of their spend, but how do you overcome that? Somebody is risking their job by going to a startup or a smaller company or something that's slightly less unknown.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that, that risk factor. I get emails, and probably you do too, every week from companies trying to, sell me something. And sometimes the pitch is, hey, we just got 2 million, 10 million in funding. Do you want to work with? And I'm like, I don't care that you got funding. I just want to know that you solved the problem for me. I do want to know that you're going to be around if I invest in you. And that's, I think, one of the biggest risks that that enterprises feel like they're taking when they're investing in a startup, as opposed to something that might be a lesser capable solution, but it's with a company that's been around a while, and so they're probably going to think of that. So let's talk through this. How does a small business, or what things can the small business do to position themselves so that it makes an enterprise feel comfortable, at least having a dialogue, a sales dialogue?
Sure. And I think there's 50 different right answers to that.
Yeah.
But my position has always been that before you sell, you got to have some name recognition. They had to have seen you somewhere, just so there's a perception that you're going to be bigger if they think they've heard your name before. So one of the companies I had started was MotionSoft. And it sounds big. It sounds sort of, I can't tell you how many times they would call us up and during the course of conversation, they just accidentally say Microsoft.
Right. Yeah.
And that actually helped. That actually helped us because it wasn't one of these cool new names. And it wasn't a cutting edge name. It was sort of a stodgy. It spoke to this audience we were selling to. So that worked.
And just to clarify for people who are listening, MotionSoft sold software to gyms, right?
Cool.
To
Gyms and gym management software.
Yeah.
So by most accounts, it was a it was a follower of technology. It would oftentimes procure software from other industries that they found could be used for their members, or however they were going to use it for billing or whatever the case may be. Very, very rarely was cutting edge technology coming out of that industry. Though I think Peloton is a really interesting and good story, particularly with COVID and how that sort of trajectory it took for those 2 years where people weren't going to the gym for any number of reasons.
So you'd mentioned that you want to have some degree of brand recognition. Now, if you've got a small ad budget, what are the ways you can actually get some brand recognition so that when you make that outbound call or that you have that first conversation somewhere, that they have a sense that you're around?
So my personal preference, I love long tail PPC.
Yeah.
You're really targeting a very select group of very knowledgeable people. There's a lot of data out there. You can be focused. You can work regionally if you wanted to. So there's a geography component if you want. You can really, an IT person in an enterprise is going to search slightly differently for gym management software or electronic health record management than a sort of a random person, if you will.
And so just to clarify, the long tail PPC being pay per click. So you're advertising on Google, but you're using not just a small 2-3 word phrase. You're using something that's much longer, which means that there are fewer people doing searches on them. But the ones who are, man, those are focused searches. Those are people with intent. Right. So that's the big benefit of using long tail. And interesting you say that, because I actually feel very strongly, and I've seen it, that using the same strategy with SEO makes a massive difference. And so there's lots of ways to create content, and I've got all kinds of strategies. We won't get into all the details in this podcast, but lots of ways to create content very quickly. And when you optimize your content, whether it's a blog, a guide, a webinar, a video that you stick on YouTube or something, with long tail terms, you get people who are interested in buying your services. And use that for your inbound as well. So that's a good one. Long tail PPC, that will help increase your brand recognition. Are there some other options that people could use? Because that requires, I guess, a budget still. Is there something that's maybe almost I shouldn't say no budget, because even creating free content for SEO means you still have to pay someone to do the content if you're not doing it yourself. So what are some of the other options?
I think as much as it's an old technique, I absolutely believe sort of getting to a conference early, finding a seat at the corner of the bar, and watching people come to you. I think that's important. And there's a psychology that of their coming to your space where you're sitting or standing. And so the conversation comes to you as opposed to you actively going out. I'm not the type of person who can just strike up a conversation sitting at a bar. I always feel very uncomfortable, but I hire great people who do have that skill, who are very friendly, outgoing. They can just sort of strike up a conversation with anybody. And I think there is, even at the enterprise level, there is a personal touch that people like. And so getting FaceTime with someone in sort of a slightly less professional setting is always very useful. Again, with COVID, that really changed a lot, and I've struggled with that. But now that things are loosening up again, I think we're gonna start going back. And I'm not talking about setting up a booth, because there is a much higher cost associated with that. But go and be a person that's seen, and have
trade shows, for example,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Just basically the idea is to go where your prospects are hanging out.
Yep.
And I've actually found recently that social posting is really effective. Because my audience hangs out, for people looking for SEO coaching, they hang out on LinkedIn. They're looking for solutions to problems, ways to scale their business. So, I provide SaaS advisory services for B2B companies. And I find that when I post regularly on LinkedIn, which I do, it actually attracts very qualified prospects.
It absolutely is. And again, even if they're not actively looking for you or what you're selling, just seeing your name, and it's sort of years ago, Google had a philosophy called ZMOT, which stood for zero moment of truth. And I really I really subscribe to that, which is get your name in front of people so that when they're ready to make a decision or are considering making a decision, your name is at least something that's sort of bouncing around between their ears.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there is sort of active selling and then there's passive selling. And I think to answer your first question, I truly believe that passive selling early on, getting your name recognition, posting this stuff on LinkedIn, even if they don't read what you've posted, they see your name and it just, that repetition, eventually it will slide in there. And when they're ready to make a decision, hopefully you're one of the 10 names they consider because they've seen it in their LinkedIn feed. So I love LinkedIn, and I'm embarrassed to say I don't think I use it enough, quite frankly.
Yeah. And I noticed that one thing is really key. I see companies posting all about themselves. We launched this. We've got a brand new feature. We've got this new, and it's all about them. And they're missing the point. It's never about them. It's all about your customer.
Yep.
And so I found actually for posting on LinkedIn, which I highly, highly recommend to get brand recognition, there's two types of content that I've felt works. There's one thought that people want to pursue the number of likes. Oh, I've got more views, I've got more likes. And I found that when I post pictures of myself with other people at an event and I tag those people, those tend to get the most number of likes. That doesn't translate to revenue though. What I found was when I start posting educational content like, oh, hey, here's how you solve this, or even better, here's a trend analysis. And I think maybe, you might have seen this also as you sold to enterprises. The CEOs, the CFOs, CTOs, the ones that buy the ones that have the final check writing authority, they look for trends that can affect their business. And when they see reports that have these trends that can either put them out of business or help them scale or grow or watch what other people are doing, that's what they pay attention to. So if you're the originator, right?
I do. I absolutely. 10 things to think about in 23. I absolutely click those.
Yep, right. Everything that can put you out of business or help you scale your business. As an executive, that's what you tune into. So if you are the originator of that type of content and you put that out where they're hanging out, like social, and long tail SEO, that tends to attract the qualified leads. And I find that companies who do that have enterprise sales executives that are definitely more successful. Well, let's move to that next stage. So let's say you've got a little bit of brand recognition through the PPC ads or through SEO or posting on LinkedIn. What's the next step? How do you get a meeting? That's the biggest question everybody asks.
I think without a question, you still need to do cold calling. You still need to do the stuff that they were doing in the 80s and the 90s and 70s and 60s. You can't, I think there's this movement, and maybe it's my age, I'm much closer to 50 than I am 25, but I still think you need to do sort of the dirty hard work. Because even again, they don't take the call or what, you're still getting the value of the name recognition drop. From perspective, as soon as we had some budget that we could spend on that was more than what you were paying for long tail PPC or going to a conference. Absolutely a strong believer in white papers. Put those together. Find a list. You got to be very mindful, particularly in Europe where we sell a lot right now, around cold emailing folks. But find a list, get that content out there of saying, hey, enterprise A had this problem. We talked to them, we came up and gave them the solution. And for me, at least, great white papers have 2 or 3 very strict components. One, you got to have pretty pictures in there. People are going to they don't want to read hundreds of pages of minutia. 2, there has to be an ROI in there. They have to, at the end of it, whether it's the CTO buying something, a marketing person buying something, a tech person buying something, whatever the case may be, at the end of the day, there has to be a financial incentive, which I always call Geico Plus. It either saves you time, saves you money, or makes you money. And that's the plus one, right? 15 minutes will save you 15%. It's easy to consume that. It needs to have, so the pretty pictures, it needs to have an ROI calculator, and it does need to have a very clear beginning. Here's the problem. Here's what we propose. Here is the solution. and it's confined to very specific things. Boiling the ocean with, we solved all your marketing problems with this piece of software. That's too broad. And particular in enterprises, I don't find that to be useful, because people are very, at least initially, my experience has been, you'll have demos with a select group of people. And then if that works out, they'll bring in a broader team. So you really want to speak to individual people. Boiling the ocean you read white papers where they solved everything with one click. And it's just, you're not going to be able to sell that way, I don't think. You have to identify the people within the enterprise.
Yeah.
And write papers that speak to those folks.
Yeah, I find that when you create material that paints a picture that people can relate to and they can see themselves in that picture, that's when you start to make that connection. And even in enterprise sales, I feel strongly about this too, is that it's about the emotion. It's about you creating that feeling that they can actually solve the problem more than just the technical aspects of, oh yeah, this is what our feature does. This is what they want to know, that they can build stuff faster, make their costs go down, be more efficient, provide a better experience for their end customers. They want to look at what is that big benefit for me. And that makes them feel good about what they're doing.
Absolutely.
So that's really important.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Hey, let's go a little bit deeper into finding that list. Okay. So that's clearly where some people may struggle, because they haven't clearly identified who their buyer is. So there's, the idea of ideal client profile, which is the type of company that you want to go after. Maybe it's a segment of a specific industry with certain amount of revenue that has the following types of customers. So you can find more people that are like your other ideal client profile. But then below that, you've got layers of personas. And so especially when you sell to the enterprise, you're selling usually to a group. It's not usually like, I just contacted this one person who happened to have all the budget authority. They don't need to bring anybody else. I mean, you said it yourself, right? You reach somebody and they've got to bring in other people. How do you know who's the first person you should be reaching? Is it
Great question.
The CFO, the CTO, who should you be talking to first?
So I think the first decision you have to make is, are you going top down or bottom up? Right. And I think that's product specific. Mm-hmm. I can speak a little bit about sort of our experience today at Meddbase. I think there's some sort of blocking and tackling we're doing particularly well. We have a strong CRM. We make everybody put notes in there. We forensically look at every deal and say, where did this start? What's the job title of that person? So we at Meddbase today, we're in EHR, electronic health records. There are hundreds of companies in the US and thousands worldwide that do this. So to go and find that list, we said, okay, where, we could sell to doctor's office, we could sell to clinics, we could sell to insurance companies, we can sell to cardiologists. I mean, and you get that list, then you call up a list broker and they'll say, oh, well, I've got 700,000 names. And you're looking in the mirror and saying, well, I only got 2 salespeople. I did the math there. That's going to take me 44 years to get through it.
Yeah.
So what we did is we take, with our existing customers, we're constantly ticking on them and asking them questions so that we get, we look at them because we know that, and we get good responses from them. And we use that data to say, okay, you know what, we're going to go after occupational health providers that have a global profile. And we typically start with not a CTO, but a director of IT. Mm-hmm. And I like sort of that mid-level for our current product, because they have technical experience, and so they do have a care about the features and functions and the UI and the UX and all of that, and I think we do really well there. But they also have a budgetary requirement, so they understand the value and the value selling that you have to do. What's your ROI? Why you versus IBM, for example?
So it's interesting that you go to a director, because sometimes I've seen many companies saying, no, you got to go straight to the top. You got to start with a CEO, you got to start with a CFO or the CTO or something like that. A director level, I guess, sort of bridges the gap between the two. They can talk to the end user who would be the ones implementing and actually using the product day to day, and the VP or CXO that actually can write that check.
Yep.
So like, it's interesting, I guess. So, but it kind of goes to your point that everybody's going to be a little bit different, right? In your case, you find that that director level actually is the right one to become your champion inside the organization to then further your expanding, outreach efforts, right?
Yeah, and the experience we've had at Meddbase was when we talk to the C-level folks and they have, it's still early in their buying process. They sort of pass us down, and we get passed down. I oftentimes feel that the people we're talking to feel obligated to speak to us. And they don't own us. They don't feel like they did the work, that they have more experience on the day-to-day stuff. And so the C-level folks generally don't work well for us. Now, at MotionSoft, where the organization was much more sort of cult of personality, where the CEO or the CXO was the driving force, it really did make sense to start at the top. At Meddbase, we like the idea that sort of mid-level person, we make that initial contact. They're talking to the operational people, the people whose job is on the line to a certain extent of, is the implementation going to go well? Does it have the features and functionality that my users are going to need on a day-to-day basis? And they can also sell it upwards internally. So I really like sort of middle management for Meddbase. They, like you said, they bridge that gap that we sell to. When we go and identify the list, it's really, where are the director level people? And we get pretty specific. We're looking for OH companies. We're looking for OH companies that don't already have an existing in-house system, because that's sometimes challenging, because they have IT teams who are going to inherently say, whoa, I'm going to lose my job if I buy this thing.
Yeah.
And we're looking for companies that seemingly have a growing footprint. And weirdly enough, we use LinkedIn. What companies are posting more? What companies are showing up more on my feeds? Where am I getting whose content am I reading? So we even use the same techniques that we use to identify the exact customer as well.
And you can use LinkedIn for very pinpointed advertising too, especially if you know the exact person you want to reach inside a company. You just like target them. And boy, does that work wonders. I know I've been the target of some very focused advertising, and it just like totally resonates with you, and you can't help but click. And the moment you do that, then they know, and then they want to like talk to you and everything. But anyway, it works out well because you're trying to solve a problem.
But I think the key to at least a startup or a smaller company is, you've built this amazing new thing, and the two questions that always throw people off is, well, who's your competition? And your inherent response is, nobody's my competition. I'm the best at it. Nobody can do what I do.
That's like the worst answer you can give anybody.
The worst answer you can give. That, and then it's the boil the ocean. I can sell to anybody in the medical space. And maybe you can, and maybe your product does do that. But like you said, you love it when you get an ad that's customized to you. It speaks to your problems, your issues, your sort of top of mind topics. So that to me is super important.
The other day I got an email from a salesperson at a large company that provides sales solutions to people. And it's a very common brand name in the sales space. I was not a prospect for them because I do not have a large team that I need to manage. I don't know why they were contacting me, but the guy was really persistent. And so he finally sent a note saying, hey, if I were one of your salespeople, what would you want me to know about selling to you? And I was like, okay, I'm going to help this guy out. Sometimes I do that. I get bombarded like everybody else with sales messages, but I thought, okay, let me help this guy out. So I said, have you asked the question to qualify me yet? Do you know if I would actually buy your services? Have you done any research on me? And I never heard from him after that. Because maybe he did and he realized, actually, I'm not the right prospect. He was barking up the wrong tree. So focusing your search on the right people is really important. This sort of ties into having as you're scaling a business, larger companies have a BDR function, which is business development reps. They're the ones that go out there, set the meetings. They pass those leads on to the sales executives, the account executives who actually do the demos, try to close the deals. For a smaller company that doesn't have that entire function built out yet, what I've seen happen, and maybe you've seen this too, is that people will just hire a salesperson and say, all right, go out and sell.
Yeah.
But there's no support for that person. So as you start, let's say you're a small business, you got limited resources, limited budget. How do you build a sales function inside your company so that you can get to that point where you've got a full BDR function? So like the really refined processes. What are your first steps?
So I have a new sense on this, actually. We have recently engaged with an outsourced BDR company, effectively. And I was skeptical, to say the least. But what I found is if you do the grunt, sort of the heavy lifting at the beginning and really can define to them what you sell, who you sell to, and how you sell it, the results have been really, really good for us. A lot of them are definitely working off of, nowadays at least, our success pay. And I'm okay with that. If they're bringing leads to the table for us, I'm happy to pay for that. I think once you get a little bit more established, then you start bringing in. But I think the point you made was spot on, which is a lot of companies think, okay, well, I'm going to hire this guy. He has a book and he's going to call his contacts, and tomorrow I'm going to sell to his contacts.
Yeah.
And I wish maybe that works at the non-enterprise level, but at the enterprise level, that rarely is successful. Because you still have to have, the white papers, the educational materials, so that when you give something to someone, it blossoms and grows because they pass it on to 5 people in their organization and they start seeing your name. You really do need to be a gardener more when you're doing B2B sales than a hunter.
One of the companies that I was working with to help scale and grow had a product that they were only able to sell to one level. And actually, in this case, it was just the director level. They couldn't penetrate higher. And they're like, but wait, our platform can actually work across all these departments. We need to reach the CXO so they can see how we can go beyond just this one segment of directors. And so, our team was looking at ways to improve dashboards and so on. And I looked at the dashboard that we had and I said, well, if I were a CXO and I saw this dashboard, like the first thing I would do is like, oh, you belong in this department for this director. We are not actually fit. Our dashboard does not fit what the CEO actually wants to see. We need to create expanded information so that they can see trends across their enterprise and so on. And the moment we added that dashboard, things changed. We were actually able to penetrate across other departments. And so I think you also, in addition to just, figuring out where you land inside the company to start the conversation, you have to look at the product market fit. Don't fool yourself into thinking that your product will work across all these different divisions when what they see is something that only works for one group, right? That's another key thing to keep in mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what are some of the big pitfalls that people fall into? The mistakes they make. One we kind of discussed is like you just hire a salesperson, kind of imagine that they've got this pixie dust that they will sprinkle across their book of business from the past, and suddenly all this revenue will flow in. That never happens. What are some of the other mistakes that people make?
So boil the ocean, definitely. Not identifying who your buyers are within an organization. The one you just said, the reporting functionality, super important. One of the things we struggle with is we go into a meeting, a first demo or a second demo, and the demo grows great. And all of a sudden, a sales cycle that we know is going to take 6, 8, 10 months. We've done 1 or 2 demos, and all of a sudden, the next week, it shows up on our sales pipeline report it's going to close at the end of this month because somebody said that's when they want it. So I don't know how, is it I don't want to kill optimism, right? You don't want to do that. But there is optimism and realism, which is you're not selling. If your sales cycle is 10 months, it doesn't matter how good your demo is. It doesn't matter how much they love you. You have to be prepared for the fact that it should take 10 months because that's historically your data. That's what you have to rely on. But all of a sudden it shows up on a sales pipeline report and you're like, wait, this has been in our pipeline for 6 weeks and we think we're closing it in 2 weeks. And all of a sudden what happens is the entire organization gravitates towards that prospect, and you stop all the other things that you need to do to be successful. Again, salespeople are by nature optimists. Salespeople are, and they have to be because it's such a tough job. But you really got to remember, if it takes 10 months, it's going to take 10 months probably. And don't suddenly see a prospect, particularly one that, going back to the earlier question you asked, is how much of your revenue is that going to, what percentage of your revenue is that? And suddenly put all of your focus on that and not continue doing all of the other things you need to do to be successful.
Yeah. Some of the other mistakes that I've seen enterprises make is having completely unrealistic expectations. And oftentimes an executive would say, well, this is what we're going to do. We are going to double our revenue in the next 12 months, come hell or high water. And everybody's just like, okay. They're not going to say no. And they're trying to figure out ways to do it. And month after month, they miss the projections, and then you have a churn in leadership. It's this scenario plays out so frequently in enterprises, and I think it's something that, God, like how do you get a handle on whether you've got a realistic expectation of what your revenue targets should be? That's a bit kind of elusive to people. But like, how do you think through that? How do you do that in your business now? How did you do that in MotionSoft?
So with MotionSoft, it was I think the hindsight on MotionSoft is I only remember the last 2 years where things were easy.
Everything else was a blur, right?
Yeah, everything else was a blur. And yeah. I think like childbirth, it's probably best it remains that way. But in all seriousness, I think it's reminding yourself on a daily basis that sales cycles are sales cycles. It's don't get overly focused on one lead or one prospect or one opportunity in your pipeline. Continue, it's trying to maintain, there's so many ups and downs with starting a company, so many emotional highs and emotional lows, that the last thing you need to do is insert your own optimism into a sales pipeline report. It's trying to stay steady for your employees, for your investors, for your own sanity, quite frankly. So for me, I look at a sales pipeline report. If something's been on there for 18 months and your sales pipeline is 10 months, your sales cycle is 10 months, and at some point you just got to remove it and say that's not happening, right? And it goes as we talked about earlier. It goes the other way. You're not going to close something probably in 2 months. Now it happens every now and then. But you have to understand that's the outlier to your numbers. So it's about consistency. It's about showing up to work every single day, taking the measured steps every single day to build success. The problem is it's glorified. This company started yesterday and now they've got a $2 billion valuation and boom, they're all the way up here. It absolutely happens. But, as we were talking earlier, MotionSoft, and in your case, Mailer, you were in the tech space, and it took over a decade of just showing up to work every day, slogging it out, being better than your competition, doing the little things every single day. And and those little things have to be maintained. Like for us, SharePoint's been a game changer, right? We have a shared document. As things move forward, we go back quarterly and change and update documents so that they're speaking to the trend lines. They're speaking to what the buyer is thinking about today. It's painful because you're like, the document's done, checklist that, knock it off my list. I don't have to worry about it again. That's one of the things that's really tough. It's going back and updating your marketing documents, making sure your website, the little things. And this is why having an outsourced person doing your SEO is valuable, Raj, because you get blind to it. You're like, I know what I know what I do. I know what I'm trying to say in that website, but somebody else reads it and they're like, that is not what it's conveying.
Yeah. Right. How many times have I have a company come to me and say, hey, can you help with our website? And I take a look and it's like, well, what exactly do you guys do? It is not clear at all. And it's a tiny little company. I mean, that message should be like a couple of like words that instantly convey what you do right on the front
Yep.
page.
Yep.
And yeah, that's an interesting point. Well, kind of like getting back to that pipeline generation thing. So a lot of companies look at this as, this connection between marketing and sales, and you've got marketing supposedly generating the inbound leads and creating material so that this outbound BDRs can actually start to generate. So you've got a pipeline build, and then you've got a conversion rate. So, all right, if we generated 1,000 leads this month, we expect maybe, I don't know, 150, 200 of those to actually result in meetings. How do you come up with these types of metrics when you don't have data? Like you sort of have to pull something out of thin air and then experiment and see what your numbers look like, right?
Yeah,
See what your close rates are, right?
absolutely. So I think there's two things that you have to look at from a timeline perspective. One is when you have no data. All right. And again, this is where the highs and lows come into place. You want to have stretch goals, right? I'm going to, 10 leads. I want to get 9 meetings out of it. Okay. And it's important to sort of have that drive, that internal, get everybody on the team to be as perfect can be. But then you also have to, and you communicate that to your staff because everybody wants to hear great things. And you certainly communicate that to potential investors. But you also have to have and communicate to your employees what are realistic goals. Like you're going to get 10 leads. If you can get 3 meetings out of that, we consider that a success. And, we always use the baseball analogy. If you look in, the best baseball players were only getting a hit 1 out of every 4 times they come up. You have to have a realism. You have to communicate both the optimism and the realism because staff do get, they can get depressed if they feel like they're letting you down. And
it's discouraging.
Yeah, it's
discouraging. It's demotivating, and that's what makes churn permeate throughout the organization. That's a slippery slope, and you can lose some really good people by giving them completely unrealistic expectations just because that's what you want to have happen. I understand willing something to happen because there's merit to that, but at the same time, if your target is so high, and I want you to high jump 50 feet, that's not gonna,
And it's important to communicate both to the staff. Particularly with COVID, for us at least, we don't have the office culture that we used to. So people are already a little disconnected as is. So if every time you set a goal and you're always missing it, that is very, very discouraging. And the story on the other end of that is, you'll sometimes do a meeting with someone and it's a terrible mindset, and I try to break it out of my own mindset. But you're talking to someone and you're like, you're just an employee at a big company. Why do you care so much? And that's the thing. If you build a good culture, people care about their job. I mean, they spend a third of their working day at these things. So you want to have, just like your small company means the world to you, and those employees mean the world to you. At big companies, those people are just as happy in some cases, and it means they are good stewards of their spend. And you need to be mindful of that. And you need to, it's so cliche to say you have to have a good culture, you have to have a good culture, you have to be a good culture, but I really don't think you can ever do too much of it. And you have to be reminded of it, and you don't want to discourage, but you want to push. I mean, there's a balance there, and I don't know if I have an answer as to what the right balance is, but I know I struggle with it every day.
And it's just something I think a lot of us in the executive roles, leadership roles struggle with is how do you keep your team motivated, but also give them those stretch goals and the support that they need to get there. I got to say, Hossein, there's so many other topics to cover in this topic of selling to the enterprise, but I like that we focused on how do you get a meeting when you're a startup. And so, getting your brand out there, through pay-per-click, perhaps search engine optimization, creating white papers that are focused, that don't boil the ocean, that don't solve all kinds of problems, finding a list of exactly who that initial buyer could be so that you can create a champion inside your organization. All those contribute to improving your success rate. And then, of course, being realistic about your pipeline and not having this pie in the sky and looking at your metrics. So I really appreciate our conversation, Hossein. I think there are a lot of good takeaways. Anything else you would want to add? And also, how can people get a hold of you if they want to connect?
Sure. I would add one thing, which is what I'm struggling with right now, and it's a real challenge for us, which is partnerships. And I literally had this conversation with the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company just before we jumped on this call. And I said, look, I can't push you guys. You guys are the 800-pound gorilla, but I know what I need. And being able to, and I'm always afraid of how far I can push a company. But what I found is especially if starting an agreement that's a partnership, in our case is a global partnership for, Australia, Europe, Southeast Asia, Middle East, and South America, it's important that you don't let fear dictate what you need to say to your partners, to your clients, to your customers, to your employees. And again, this is that high and low thing. But you got to be careful not to let yourself be overcome by fear. In terms of reaching me, the name of the company is Meddbase. We are very specifically an occupational health provider for global companies that have operations in multi-regions. You can find us at meddbase.com, meddbase.com, not medibase.com, which is another company. And if anybody listens to this and has questions, by all means, feel free to reach out to me through the website. We're still small enough where every single person who fills out a form on our website, everybody in the company gets that lead so that it doesn't fall through, which I think is pretty typical. And, I'm happy to answer any questions around enterprise sales or around the fears we have every single day about how we operate our company.
Yeah, thank you so much for this conversation, Hossein. I know that being at that stage of your company it's thrilling and scary at the same time. And I think that's part of the thrill, actually. So, so thanks again for joining me.
Thanks, Raj.